Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. My name is David Talbot. I'm Managing Director and Head of Research here at Red Cloud Securities. I'm delighted to host a Red Cloud webinar today on PGEs and uranium. We are going to hear from ValOre Metals Management, including Jim Paterson, he's the Chairman and CEO of the company, and Colin Smith, VPX. During today's webinar, they will provide an overview and outlook, and then we'll take some questions. You can type the questions in to your text box, the chat box at any time. We'll get to as many as we can. Before we kick things off, first I need to discuss the fine print. During this ValOre Metals webinar, forward-looking statements may be made. I would direct listeners to their forward-looking statements outlined on page 2 of their corporate presentation. That can be found on the company's website, valoremetals.com. For Red Cloud Securities, Inc., I'd highlight this webinar is for information purposes only. It should not be considered a solicitation or recommendation to buy or sell securities. We note this call does not consider the particular situation or needs of individual investors, and participants should rely on their own investigation and seek their own professional advice before investing. Please see our most recent research located on the Red Cloud website for specific disclosures on ValOre Metals. Now, before Jim and Colin step up, I'd like to say a few words. ValOre is somewhat unique. It has major interests in both PGMs and uranium. Now, during our last ValOre webinar in April, I really concentrated on the PGE aspects during my opening statements. Platinum group metals are a group of 6 precious metal elements, but the company's focus is really on 3 of them: platinum, palladium, and rhodium. They tend to be found alongside each other, often as a byproduct of copper and nickel mining, but sometimes they're dominant elements like we see at Pedra Branca as well. Now, during today's open, I'd like to focus a little bit more on the uranium side. Not to say ValOre is going to pay any less attention to its PGE asset. In fact, the project is moving forward probably better than we had expected. But the market does want to hear all about its uranium asset. This is something the company has sunk $55 million into over the last uranium cycle, essentially creating one of the largest high-grade deposits in the world outside of the Athabasca Basin. So, we've seen very positive news come out of the sector, specifically last week when Sprott Physical Uranium Trust increased its base shelf prospectus to $3.5 billion US. So what that really means is after raising $1.3 billion and putting that into uranium already this year, it now has regulatory permission to raise nearly triple that amount. So we expect the company to continue to add to its 40 million pounds worth of physical uranium, currently worth about 1.85 billion US. We view potential for Sprott to raise further funds as very good news for the sector. Now, we still await an increase in long-term contracting to support uranium prices on a sustainable basis. We would still love to see uranium demand being driven by end-user buying. The nuclear utilities that use about 177 million pounds of uranium annually, but really not made any purchases or signed any contracts of magnitude in recent times. Perhaps the recent Chinese purchase of uranium from Kazatomprom might be a sign of things to come. However, ongoing uranium purchases by Sprott would be expected. It should be expected, and once further funds are raised. This should limit available uranium supply, and increase uranium spot prices as a result. So, and I'd feel rest assured that I don't expect that material is coming out, given the nature of the product, of the trust. So one cannot ignore the impact of physical on the uranium price this year. I'd say Sprott's initial $300 million raise helped drive prices from $30 to $40 a pound start in just 1 month, starting in mid-August. And that was followed with a $1 billion raise using CTM, and spot prices increased to about 46, 47. So now, if it was to go up and raise another 2.2 billion, should that happen and they fund more purchases, that could potentially propel uranium above $50 a pound, and perhaps close to those incentive prices needed by uranium project developers. So we do expect uranium equities to react positively as prices rise. So, and this is one of our one of the fine choices out there, a company that I've covered for a better part of a decade, if not a little bit longer. So, with that, why don't I turn it over to Jim and Colin to update the audience on the company?
I could actually sense you almost say it's one of your top picks. Well, you almost said it, Dave, but you said a fine choice, which is also true.
That far yet. So.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you so much for having us. And you definitely talked about something that is very topical for ValOre. It's driven our price to almost double since the end of August. It allowed us to raise money. Red Cloud was the lead in brokered financing. We just closed $11 million financing, which was oversubscribed. And so that was really to do with the uranium price. We think anyways, most of the demand was in the share trading was driven off the Sprott Physical Uranium Trust, and all of the dollars will be spent on the uranium project. So before all that happened, though, we'd made the plan to talk about the two districts, and so this presentation today will cover the Pedra Branca PGE project in northeastern Brazil, which we believe is a palladium platinum district in the making, and the Angilak property, which is a uranium project in northern Canada, which is certainly a district scale project and one which has a lot of exploration upside to go. Let's see. Okay, next. Okay, before we start, just a little bit on who we are. We're part of Discovery Group. A lot of the companies in our group are recognizable to Canadian mining investors: Bluestone Resources, Elemental Royalties, Great Bear is a big screaming success, and Great Bear Royalties. ValOre has been a member of the group for many years, when we used to be called Kivalik Energy. Basically, we are a group that focuses on attracting very high quality talent, which generally brings with it access to excellent project deal flow. And with great people and great projects, you get access to capital. So we have this platform called Discovery Group, and the companies within it, members of the group, benefit from that platform, and ValOre is one of those companies that benefits. Just a real quick update to everybody who's been following the company, but post closing the financing, we have a little over 140 million shares outstanding. Roughly, we're trading around 50 cents or just under today, so 70 million Canadian market cap with the 12 million in the bank. That brings our enterprise value to about 58 million. Just a little under 20% insider ownership now with this last financing. We got some really good investors coming in via Red Cloud's network into the financing. So we're now moving towards being a little more institutionally held. Lots of retail support, obviously, but with interest in uranium, the institutional interest recently has flowed to ValOre. As far as the team goes, we can talk ad nauseum after about the strength of the board and the management team. But really with the new uranium focus of the financing, some of our directors are extremely relevant. You'll see in the bottom right-hand corner here, this logo for Hathor. So Dale Walster and Jim Malone were involved with that success story, which some people may not know if they weren't around following the uranium space at the time, but it was a very big deal. And they took that project from exploration concept all the way to a $650 million sale to Rio Tinto. And so we're very happy to have them on our board, as with the other gentlemen. But as far as uranium goes, that's something new to talk about. Very strong team led by Colin Smith, who's on the call today. And he'll be leading our efforts in Canada's north, but also leading the team in Brazil at Pedra Branca. So today we'll cover the two projects. Firstly, we'll talk about the Pedra Branca PG project, which is in northeastern Brazil in Ceará State. And we've been focusing the last few years on advancing that through drilling and exploration at a district scale. And then we'll also talk about the Angilak property, which our company was very active on for many years. And we've spent over $55 million on exploration there. So we have a lot to talk about. We're glad to have the money in the bank. Just finished $11 million financing, closed that. And so we'll have lots of work to do in 2022 on the Angilak property. And we'll talk to you about that today. to start real quick, before I unleash Colin, just give you a little bit of a reference of the Pedro Branca PGE project. Ceará State is in northeastern Brazil. If you're visiting the project, you'd land here in Fortaleza, represented by this beautiful airport, international airport, 3 million people on the Atlantic Ocean, skyscrapers, all the trappings of a major cosmopolitan city, port included, and then highways that lead right into the center of the country. You've got two choices to our project, which is near a little town called Capitão Mor, a little under 1,000 people, and not rainforest, dry savanna, much like Texas, and very easy to get around, very agricultural, very well located with great regional infrastructure. And I think I will let Colin take it from here.
Thank you, Jim. Yeah, so as Jim said before, Pedro Branca, we believe, is a district scale project for PGMs. It's over 70 kilometers of trend. This prospective geological trend, you can see in the map on the right, is the sort of shaded green area called the Troya unit. That's a mafic to ultramafic sill, which has been since dismembered into these discrete pods of PGM deposits. And so there's been historical expenditures over $35 million US. Most of that's been incurred by Anglo American Platinum. They were with the project for about 11 years and spent the lion's share of that $35 million bucks. Since then, we've spent about 4.4 on the project. You could imagine that the exploration in Brazil is very cost effective. Drilling is very cost effective. And so we're able to really stretch our dollars down there. And the first thing that we engaged in is to calculate and release a maiden 43-101 resource. This was done in 2019 on all pre-ValOre drilling. We've since drilled, close to 18,000 meters of exploration resource expansion drilling since then. But that 2019 resource came out, it's a little over 1 million ounces, 2 PGE plus gold. So that's a straight summation of palladium ounces plus platinum plus gold. No equivalence or anything. It's just a straight summation. And the ratio of palladium to platinum is about 2 to 1, if you're interested in that. And, what we've been engaged on in conjunction to drilling is district-wide targeting. So we've dusted off some sort of well-known tools in Brazil, but lesser known globally, like the Trado auger drill, which is essentially a lawnmower engine mounted on top of a steel frame. And what it allows us to do is to really vet targets quickly and effectively and efficiently, both in real time. So we see the geology of the overburden and then the top of the bedrock. And then we also get a very comprehensive geochemical sample, which can be anywhere from a couple meters in depth to 15 meters. So we're able to really see anything that's hidden under cover, and so it's been really effective for us property-wide. So
and before you go on, Colin, just go back once. So we had a breakdown in communication. If you look at the second bullet point there, there's an X. We're not avoiding answering that question. 2020 and 2021 expenditures are actually detailed in that final bullet there. So it should be about 4.5 million roughly Canadian dollars since we acquired the project.
Thanks, Jim.
Yeah, thanks.
So yeah, as mentioned, the first thing we did in 2019 was calculate a maiden 43-101 resource. I won't get into the nuts and bolts of that again, but you can see an example of one of the 5 deposit areas which comprise this resource. You can see on the inset map here, there's 5 in total that are included within that resource. The one we're looking at right now is Esparro. So it's in close proximity to 2 other deposit areas. So within a 5-kilometer radius of each other, you have 60% of the resource. And we did drill Esparro and Curiú this year, both for resource continuity. Am I in whiteboard here?
No, I turned her off.
Okay, great. So we drilled Esparro and Curiú this year for resource continuity and also to provide samples for metallurgical test work, which is ongoing. And what this just shows you is one of the things that we got really excited about getting into this project was the nature of the mineralization. And what we're looking at here is a 3D oblique view of the optimized 2019 pit, and then drill holes within there, and PGE assays downhole are in pink. The warmer the pink, the better the grade. And you can see some of the grade intervals that we came back with from the drilling this year: 77 meters of almost 3 grams from surface. So you can see as you move your eye across the screen, all these intercepts are essentially from surface, and these ore bodies are at surface. So from an open pit mining standpoint, very compelling. In the case of Esbarro, the actual dip of the tabular ore body is sympathetic to the topography. So the strip is next to none. And when you're getting those kind of grades at surface, it's very exciting from an open pit standpoint. Like I said, we have drilled, over 16,000. We're closing on 18,000 meters actually over the last 2 years. A good 2/3 of that's been focused on resource expansion. So in particular, the Santo Amaro deposit, which you see in the north, and the Trapia deposit area that you see in the south there, those were deemed as having the highest potential for expansion. We're really focused on drilling those off. And you can see that the releases from the past couple of years are pretty compelling from those areas. And we have a slide actually that summarizes the upside potential for both of these deposit areas. What you're looking at here are 3 maps, all the same scale, and drill hole collars are in the dots. So the bigger the dot, the warmer the red, the better the drill hole. They're coded by gram meter, which you can see on the left. So for those of you who don't know what a gram meter value is, if you have a 10 gram per ton interval over 10 meters, it's 10 times 10, so that's a 100 gram meter hole. So it just gives you a way of visualizing in 2D space how good a 3D drill hole might be at depth. And so within the black dashed lines that you see in each one of these maps, those are the drill holes that constitute the 2019 resource. Everything outside of that is a drill hole that ValOre has drilled. And as you can see, all those are sitting outside of the existing resource. And so as we work towards a recalculation of the resource in Q1 of next year, all these drill holes can be looked at. And, you can just see from the scale bars on the bottom of the maps that the upside is pretty outstanding at all these deposit areas. So as I said, we actually just finished up our 2021 drill program up at at a new target we developed called Massive Pay, but we put out a release last week summarizing the results from the northernmost deposit area, Santo Amaro. The exciting hole from this past release was 127 meters of 0.85 from 39 meters depth, or about 30 meters vertical. And there's lots of high grade up there as well. You can see within the news release, there's all sorts of assay intervals that are between 70 to 100 gram meter holes. Those are all, outside of the resource. Those are all going to be considered, obviously, for the next calculation. And as I said, we're getting high grade material, really underground style intervals, like you see on the bottom right here, very close to surface. So that drill core you're looking at in the bottom right image, that's from the Esbarro. Within that drill interval, we're getting samples that are in the 30 to 40 plus gram per ton range. So again, when you're hitting these kind of grades at or near surface, that's highly compelling for any open pit. Okay, so now we're going to put on our toques and zip up our parkas and fly many, many thousand miles to the north to Nunavut territory in Canada. And this is the uranium asset we were discussing before. Much like Pedra Branca, it's a district-scaled land package. It's closing in on 60,000 hectares. It hosts the LAC 50 deposits. So those comprise a series of deposits, 5 zones in total, which comprise a little over a 43 million pound U3O8 resource at 0.69% U3O8. So as mentioned before, that's one of the highest uranium resources on a global basis and highest Canadian uranium resource outside of the Athabasca Basin. So formerly when ValOre was Kivlik, there's over 55 million Canadian invested in this project. A lot of that was on drilling. But in addition to that, we've done some substantial metallurgy. The metallurgical performance of this rock is great. It recovers very well. It's very low impurities. And so it's as far as the junior uranium space, this is a very advanced project that's seen a lot of work. And, it hasn't been the core asset focus for us in the past few years as the market struggled. However, obviously we're putting big dollars and big focus on this now. And over the past half year, we've been re-looking at the entire data sets, both the geochemical, the geophysical, and then adding to that with new worldview data to maximize our dollars next year.
Before you go on, Colin, just maybe highlight the areas that actually comprise the resource, those little orange squiggles, and maybe how they relate to all the different yellow dots on the map because I think it's quite significant to show the 43 million pounds and how much upside there is already identified by the work we've done.
Absolutely, yeah. So the 43 million pounds are denoted by the red lines there with the yellow halo. As I said, 5 zones in total there. But the exciting thing about what Jim was just saying is that outside of that resource, within either a few hundred meters or 35 kilometers along trend, we have 14 targets in which we drilled into, back when we were active with the project. 14 of those targets, we hit uranium. We hit high-grade uranium with analogous deposit models, analogous rocks to the LAC 50 trend. Those targets just lacked the drill density at that time to be incorporated into the resource. The lion's share of the drilling back then was focused on LAC 50, obviously to build up and constrain that resource. So from a resource expansion potential, the target pipeline is plumb full. A lot of the focus is going to be on expanding that resource, but then also going back to these targets and what we've drilled, we've hit. We just need to drill more of them. And through the course of reprocessing the geophysics and the geochemistry, we have a really good targeting methodology that's going to allow us to incorporate many of these pre-resource targets into the next calc. So pretty amazing upside potential property-wide. And you can sort of see just in the little inset map, the 2 large stars, those denote the location of LAC 50, and those smaller red stars, those are the targets I was referring to, with the exception of one. All of those have been drilled, all those have hit uranium, and all those are going to be slated for drilling next year. What we're looking at here is a little more granular look at the LAC 50 trend resource. It's very well constrained. You can see over 60 kilometers of drilling, over 335 holes, and great expansion between 2011 to 13, increased the resource by 200%. And as I said, this is a drill density scenario where of these targets which we've drilled, we've hit uranium. Once we get back in there and we're able to punch a few more holes into them, we'll look to see a lot of these additional zones be incorporated. And on the right, you're just looking at the 3D sort of oblique view of the block model for the resource, and you can see the 5 zones. There's Western Extension, Main Zone, Eastern Extension, J4, and Ray. And the grades are denoted in the colors. Obviously, the hotter the color, the warmer the grade. And you'll see in a couple slides, there's huge potential along strike and down plunge of this resource. You can see it's wide open at depth in certain locations, wide open along strike. So, there's low-hanging fruit, so to speak, still left on LAC 50. And this is sort of what I was talking about. So if you look at the inset map, center of the right image there, that's the LAC 50 trend, 6.5 kilometers from tip to tip. We're looking in particular at the easternmost zone, so J4 and Ray, which together comprise a little over 15 million of the 43 million million pound resource. And again, we're looking sort of more straight on at the block map at the bottom right. And you can see what I was saying, this thing is wide open at depth. This is wide open along strike, and it's wide open with this sort of southeasterly or southwesterly plunge that you can see. And the maps on the right show, one of the strong targeting pieces and data sets that we use is VLF. So VLF really serves to highlight the structures in which this uranium is hosted. And so you can see if you just sort of trace your eyes along I'm trying to use the whiteboard here, but I'm not sure if I'm actually, are you able to see me drawing at all?
You have to click on the little crayon thing and then.
Yeah, I'm clicking on it, but I'm not getting any love from it.
Okay.
I'll just, yeah. But anyhow, the little black dash lines, those are conductors. You can see the 2 that are associated with with J4 and Ray resource zones. And then you can see an offset. Okay, and that structural offset is basically just displaced that conductor, that structure that hosts the uranium mineralization in the resource. And in the case of the one that used to be a part or attached to J4, which is the northern of the 2 zones, that's been drilled, and it's been hit in 5 of 6 holes have hit high-grade uranium. And so this thing is largely undrilled. It's in terms of strike length, it's actually larger than J4 itself. And same goes with the 2 conductors you see just to the south of that longer dash line. So resource expansion potential both near and far from the existing resources is outstanding. And so that's going to be a big part of our program in 2022. Now, in addition to that, there's a style of target or a class of target called target advancement. And these were similar to the ones I was talking about before. These are targets in which we've drilled, we've hit uranium, we just haven't gone back to them to drill them off to a resource density. This one in particular is Blaze. You can see in the inset map, it's about 2 kilometers to the west of Lac 50. Between 2011 and 2012, we targeted Blaze with about 24 holes over a strike length of 100 meters. And you can see that one of the highlight drill holes there, 11BZ-10, over 1% U308 over 25 meters. Okay, that's not quite true width. The true width is probably about a quarter of that, so closer to 4 or 5 meters, but that's an extremely high grade intercept. And since then, we've done a lot of geochemistry in this area. And so what you'll see, the color legend within that map there, basically the warmer the color, the higher the soil anomaly. So enzyme leach is a soil sampling technique. And you can see that this anomaly is over 1 kilometer in length. The best parts of it are actually completely undrilled. And not only that, but in the tanned or the gray dashed line, that's the trace of one of these conductors I was just discussing before, which shows where these structures are going. So anytime you're seeing a good soil anomaly that's associated with one of these conductors, that's a very high quality drill target. And so obviously next year, this is one of the targets we're going to be focusing on, drilling off along the conductor, but also more focused in the areas of where the best soil anomalies are situated.
Oh, go back. Yeah, I also just really want to highlight to people that all those drill holes on the left, if we were in the Athabasca Basin and somebody drilled a new target and had some of the results that we have on the left there, if you look at some of them, for example, hitting uranium from 44 meters all the way down to 102, albeit in multiple zones, but in the same drill hole, would get most people super excited and just recognize at what depth we're hitting from 44, not at 300 meters or 400 meters or 700 meters depth, but very near surface. So Kivalliq, and which of course is now ValOre, Blaze got us really excited. We just didn't march along strike. As Colin was saying, we didn't actually have the benefit of the enzyme leach data at the time we were drilling. So this is new data that we have, and it leaves a pretty amazing target for us in 2022.
Yes, indeed. I mean, and further to that, you can see there's an additional anomaly that's circled, cutting off on the west side of that image. We have very good coverage on enzyme leach. A big focus on that exploration back then, as we were drilling, was this geochemical technique, and so there's just a plethora of targets like this that really warrant and are screaming for drill holes. Mm-hmm. This being one of them. We talk about a district, that you hear that buzzword a lot in industry, but when you look at the inset map up here and you see, barely where the Lac 50 trend is, sort of towards the northeast corner of the claims, we're now a long trend about 30 to 35 kilometers to the southwest at Rib. And so it's not pictured on that inset map, but you can see it on the main map. It's right along the margin of the Angilak Basin. So the whole margin of that basin is prospective, and there's 50 to 60 kilometers of it. And when you're having mineralization of this nature and this style that's drill confirmed on the other side of the basin, that's what we mean by district. This whole thing is highly prospective, and this target in particular is called Rib. It was first explored by Noranda back in the mid to late 70s. They drilled 25 holes over a 1.2 kilometer trend here. This predated the geophysics that we now have. This predated the geochemistry, which you're seeing featured on this map here. And so while they did actually have some impressive hits, and they hit actually high-grade uranium on 14 of 25 holes, and again, like Jim was saying, this is shallow. These are mineralization is less than 35 meters depth starting, so very, very shallow. But since then, we've done a lot of geophysics. We've done obviously a lot of geochemistry, and you can see there's over a 4-kilometer uranium in soils anomaly that's largely untested. And you can see by the arrows and where the anomaly ends or doesn't end, more importantly, this thing is totally open. And so one thing we're going to do when we get back in there, we're going to redo some geophysics. So this one area in particular actually lacks ground VLF EM. So we're going to get back in there, run ground VLF EM. That's going to help us really discern where these structures are situated. We're going to expand the geochemical coverage and then ultimately get this to a drill ready stage. But in terms of scalability, you saw that in some of the previous maps, LAC 50, the 43.3 million pounds U3, that's over a strike length of 6.5 kilometers, but there's big gaps within there. So we're talking a soil anomaly here that is cohesively almost as large as LAC 50 and completely open on strike in both directions. It's also open in the direction towards the basin, so to the southeast there. And further to that, I mean, you can see there's a 5.34% uranium rock sample that's hosted, right in one of the bigger soil anomalies. Again, most of this target area is completely undrilled, and so from a new discovery style target, I mean, this is pretty exciting. And there's several other like this that have these scales of anomalies that are totally undrilled. They might be missing certain data sets, which we'll be infilling in this coming year. But I mean, RIB is as good as it gets for early stage, essentially undrilled target by ValOre.
Mm-hmm. I'll take it from here. Maybe Colin, just catalyst for growth for both projects in the near term. The program, as Colin was saying, has just been completed, fully funded. So we still have results to come from a few of the targets that were drilled, including Massapay and one or two others. And so those will be coming as received from the labs. And then what we'll be hoping to do, subject to receiving some of the MET test work from Asparo and Courier and others, is deliver a inferred resource in the first quarter of 2022 that should incorporate all the drilling that the company has done since acquiring the project in 2019. So all the drilling in 20 and 2021, as Colin explained. So actually quite a watershed Q1 for us. And then on the heels of that, we'll be working on a PEA, hoping to deliver that in the first half or as close to as possible to the first half of 2022, as soon as humanly possible. But we'll also have our amazing team working on continued discovery, continued resource expansion, continued target advancement. They've really got a handle on the mineralization there, and they're all quite excited about the district scale potential. And then at Angilak, obviously, this is the first time in several years that we are funded. We're funded to do work on the project. There is an interest in the uranium sector, which is significant. And I don't think it's fleeting. No one in our company thinks the interest in the uranium space is now fleeting. We think that the uranium price will go higher, as Dave, for the reasons Dave was describing at the beginning of this call. And because of that, we'd like to obviously throw our hat in the ring and get back exploring again. And so that some of the things that we'll be doing next year still need to be permitted and sorted out. The drilling contractors selected, all the logistics planned, all the permits received, but we're working away on that. We're fully funded. And, this is the type of project that our group and our company has had lots of experience at, particularly on this project, having spent over 55 million in years past, drilled almost 90,000 meters, 60,000 for the resource. So we're very much excited to get back on the project again. Dave, you want to come back? And there he is.
Yeah, here I am.
There you go.
So, thank you very much, Jim and Colin. Great presentation as always. We will now kick off the Q&A portion of the webinar. Reminder to everybody to please type your questions into the chat box, and we will get to as many as we can. So we already have a few questions here, guys. So let's start off with the PG stuff. So at Pedra Branca, how far through the 8,000 meter diamond drilling program are you completed, and what are your plans at drilling some of the new ground in the area?
So
we're done drilling, and then we'll let Colin answer the rest. Sorry.
So we just finished up late last week with the drill program. So that's all finished up. We'll have more results coming out over the course of the next month or so. So obviously staying tuned for releases on that. In terms of the new ground, the first thing that has to happen is it needs to be official with the A&M. So it's all said and done, but until we officially have the ground in the system, we can't actually do any drilling comprehensive exploration programs of that nature. So in the meantime, we're certainly mapping. We're doing all the things that we can do to prepare us for drilling. But I think we have targets that are moving quickly along the target pipeline that are more drill ready stage, and that's the whole approach. We have this methodology in which we sequentially can vet targets to a stage where our hit rate with the drill bit is very high, and so there's a lot of ground. It's, call it 40 kilometers of additional prospective trend, much of which is completely lacking geochemistry, much of which has not been mapped before. So that's the focus now. It's geological mapping. It's understanding the terrain out there, and once we're ready to go in the system, then obviously as soon as we can drill it, we will, and as soon as we're comfortable with the targets, we'll get there.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Speaking of target pipeline, could you give us an update on the Mendez North target? I think you guys were pretty excited about that earlier.
Yeah. Mendez North is, we did a comprehensive geochemical program at Mendez North, focusing on 3 worldview spectral data coincident with 3D mag targets. And through the process of those 3 programs, we established an anomaly in each one of the targets that cohesively is about 3 kilometers in strike length long. At the same time, we were also developing and executing the targeting methodology that we were defining before that uses the Trato auger drill. And through the process of that, we found some targets we really liked. Mendez North is still something that we're interested in. We still hold that ground. We're still actively considering it as a future drill target. However, the targets like Massa Pay, Santa Maria South, these are targets that we went in with the Trato. We went in with the trench and got some outstanding results, and we had some discoveries with the drill bit. And so Mendez North is still an exciting target. It's scalable, and it's still within the pipeline. It's just been kind of notched down the rung a bit because of some of the other exciting targets we have.
Okay, great. Thank you. You did, right at the tail end, you did mention your upcoming catalyst. So first quarter resource estimate, first half, hopefully the PEA. Maybe you can give a little bit of color on what we should expect. Are we looking for an entirely open pit scenario? Are you going to incorporate nickel, maybe copper, even rhodium into the study as well?
I'll just stop Colin before he makes any statements there. That's the trap we don't want to get into too much in terms of making guesstimates. We have a third party that will actually help us with that. And, there's always a struggle there in terms of we want more ounces and the QP perhaps, or the independent purveyor of that resource estimate, has their own ideas on things. But I don't think anyone in the company is super focused on the nickel. The rhodium, we don't have as much coverage, but it's something we've been considering. But I don't think at this stage we have a clear indication of all the zones and whether they'll be open pit or underground. But the focus really is, I think for the most part, completely open pit targets. We haven't done a lot of work on the underground targets. Most of the drilling that we've done has been close enough to surface that we haven't been going for an academic exercise, but rather, near surface drilling.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And you have 5 resource areas right now. How many do you anticipate with the upcoming resource update? And, if we were to look back to that 2 million ounce JORC resource a couple of years ago, would you say you've covered off on that entire area?
So
I think the JORC resource is not ours, so it's just not. It's not. There's no relation to the work that we've done. I think we're very conservative. We have a 43-101 resource, 5 zones. Did a lot of drilling, but it's unrelated to work that we do.
Yeah, and just for clarity, the 2 million ounce JORC resource, that was an equivalence. So that was a palladium equivalent. It was a 1.7 was the 2 PG plus gold JORC resource. But there's a couple targets that are going to be potentially new to the resource story at Pedra Branca. We obviously are waiting on all the assays for one of them in Massa Pay, but it's a target that we really like. It's got scale potential. It comes right to surface. It's very close to town. It's 5-minute drive from Capital Mort. It's 10-minute drive from Trapia. So yeah, and there's other targets that we've drilled that are close to other resources within the resource, like Santa Maria South. So very well that can be an additional zone to the Santa Maria global resource as well.
Right. And I'd also just point out you've got a well-developed target pipeline. So the next resource is just a point in time, and you're going to grow that as you go forward as well.
Yeah, I would agree. There's a lot. We love it. We think there's lots of upside. I think that it took us. 2019 was a pretty slow year. It was challenging, but 2020 the team really hit its stride from an exploration and drilling perspective, and then this year was even better. And so I think that not only are we excited about this inferred resource, just because we've been working pretty hard at it and we've been drilling for 2 years. But the upside is significant, particularly with this new ground we picked up and all the targets in between that aren't part of the current resource, but obviously in time, hopefully we can add to.
Right. Okay, great. Thank you. Shifting our attention to uranium, and really the reason why I became involved in the company in 2008 is it was spun out from Kaminak. How quickly can you guys start drilling at Angilak? Is that something we should expect early in the winter? Do you need to wait for further geophysics to be completed, or can you just get going at some of these extensions?
I think firstly, there's still some planning to do. We haven't been there in quite a while, so there is planning before we can get back on there. Obviously, the type of rig, the type of target will dictate what's the best time to start. If there is a kind of a spring type work program that's occurring, that would probably be March or April, and the days are getting longer. The sun is out, the bugs aren't bad, but it's just snow. And the lakes are still frozen. And then, of course, June, July, August, and the first little bit of September is actually a really good time for exploration drilling. And probably, Dave, you've been up there in August. We invited people like you after the bugs were terrible, So it was probably late August when you were up there. And Dave's actually been on site twice. So, still some planning to do there, what the optimal rig is and the timing to start. But as soon as possible, really with this size of program, a lot of times investors want you to start drilling right away, but it isn't the most productive time of the year to start February or March. We've done it before. Costs a lot more money. The days are super short. It's really cold. And you just spend a lot more money on logistics and keeping everybody warm. So there's better times in the year to be drilling. Right.
Okay, great. Thank you. Those LAC 50 trend deposits, fairly large, 43 million pounds in total there. But there are no resources below 400 meters. Do you think it's beneficial to extend those to depth? Or really are you going to try to find more mineralization along trends, such as places as J4 and Ray and targets like that?
My vote would be a long trend.
Yeah, I think I totally agree. Along trend. I mean, there's so much anomalism property wide that I don't think we have to go chasing these things deep. They're open at depth, 100%, and that's something down the line that can be further followed up. But let's focus on the targets that are going to give us the most value, and those are the ones close to surface.
Yeah, cheaper to drill shorter holes. Plus, as good as you've got already, who knows if it's the best stuff you have. So maybe give perhaps discuss a little bit about what type of uranium deposits or mineralogy you're looking for, right? You're really testing basement rocks outside of what looks to be a basin, much like the Athabasca, right? There's sandstones to the south.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, in terms of deposit model, if you understand the Athabasca Basin systems, then you would understand these ones as well. I mean, they're unconformity associated hydrothermal vein type uranium systems, so they're structurally controlled. That's why VLFEM is really a compelling data set for us, because it really lights up the contacts of these structures. And so, yeah, I mean, the Angilak Basin is essentially a sub basin of the Athabasca. And so the exploration methodology is much the same.
Right. Would there be potential for high-grade unconformity style mineralization at the sediment basement contact?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think also within the sedimentary package as well. I mean, some of the in the last image you saw with the rib, those soil anomalies are fully within the basin, and they're open in the direction of the basin. So it truly is a district scale deposit model in that sense, that you could have both basement hosted unconformity associated and also basin hosted mineralization.
Right. And there's a similar or analog over by LAC 50, which we call KU. And Dave, I know you were on the project when we made a discovery, but we couldn't talk about it too much because we didn't control the land package within the basin. We called it 9 iron, and it was uranium mineralization and iron formation that was over a significant strike length, and we had some screaming grades. And then that particular structure seemed to continue right into the basin. And now we call that whole thing KU. And it seems to connect back up again from a geophysical perspective anyways, to the margin of the basin further to the west. So I think actually there is definitely prospectivity at the unconformity or within the sedimentary basin all the way from the east to the west. And the reason why we focused to start with where we were is because there was already some indication from Pan Ocean way back in the 80s that there was a deposit that they called Lac 50. And so we focused there. We started there and we were successful. So we really didn't have a need to step into the basin. That's deeper targeting and thus more expensive. And we were right in the basement hitting mineralization at surface. So the success early on kind of dictated how we did work, but absolutely there's some potential in the basin at the unconformity. And in fact, it's pretty easy to see where the unconformity where the basin ends. So, that will be targeted.
Okay. Now you mentioned your target pipeline in Brazil, but I think you guys perfected your exploration methodology up here a decade ago. How much of a focus will be on resource expansion versus testing of targets versus recon drilling?
Yeah, I mean,
to be determined.
Yeah, we're sort of in the weeds of that now. The challenge at Angilak is really there's so many targets that for us we're really vetting and ranking them. And so as we mentioned before, there's 3 target styles. There's resource expansion, which is similar to the J4 West figures that we showed before. Those are essentially open strikes, open plunges, where we're just stepping out on the resource and drilling it. Then there's the target advancement. Those are, there's 14, I believe, targets that we mentioned before. Those are the ones that we hit uranium in previous drill programs, but not enough holes to incorporate in the resource. So maybe that would be a third of the program or maybe more. And then there's new discovery style targets, which, require some more work before we drill them, more geophysics, more geochemistry. And depending on how those programs go, those could also be a big proportion of the program next year as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But Dave, if you remember your history of the project, you may recall, but when initially, we had a 90 million market cap and no resource, we were just hitting mineralization and drill core, and the uranium market was pretty robust. But initially, obviously, we had 0 pounds in the ground in the resource. The first resource estimate just for the main zone was about 14 million pounds, if you remember back that far. And then we made the discovery of what we called the Western extension and then the Eastern extension, which were a long strike from the main zone, just offset. And we then grew to 27 million pounds. And then with the inclusion of J4 for the most part, and Ray's quite small, less than 1 million pounds. But J4, we were able to get to that 43 million pound number. So, those were discovery drill holes because really, we had no drilling background there at all. We weren't even using enzyme leach. They were just, prospecting a bit, and there was VLF conductors that were obviously of interest, very close to the main zone mineralization in the Western extension and the Eastern extension. So, I think that what could be exploration drilling might soon turn into resource expansion drilling, depending upon what we're hitting. And obviously, grades and widths will determine, and the depth, how much we will throw at something. But once we're onto something, we're not going to just wander on to something else.
Right. So, and speaking of grades, 0.69%, that's amongst the highest grade outside of the Athabasca, maybe, and that's without any byproducts at this point. So maybe explain the importance of having grade up in Nunavut.
Yeah, I mean, no roads. We're heli moving the drill for every move. So it's obviously in comparison to Brazil, it's a much more expensive jurisdiction to be working in. So having high grade up there and having tonnage is a big deal. And so we're lucky to be bestowed with that, and we'll be finding more of it next year.
Yep, high grade is important, and not only and also in the processing too, or potential processing down the road. The goal up there obviously is keep everything as small as possible. You want it as productive. You want to upgrade stuff upgrade grade as much as possible to reduce the size of any plant, because any big plant will require additional heating costs and fuel costs. So, I mean, you really want something that's compact, it's pumping out as much margin as possible. So, grade is really critical, not only for discovery and building pounds in the ground, but in the end, if there is a development scenario, you want something that's high grade, that's high margin and smaller footprint.
Right. Okay. Just a couple more questions and we'll let you go here. How do you go about enhancing your community relations, either with NTI or First Nations in Nunavut?
I think that's a question that is multifaceted. So it's not like we do community relations with NTI. NTI is a sophisticated corporation. They hold the largest land package in North America, based solely on resource potential. They're sophisticated business people, and so it's not like we do community relations with them. We have a business arrangement with NTI, and their job is to manage the resources on behalf of the people of Nunavut. So it's very different. We don't do community relations with them. As far as the communities in Pedra Branca, for example, we have an office in a place called Capital More, and the team gets in their truck and drives to the project areas, and they eat in restaurants and hire locals and so forth. At Angilak, it's not like that. There isn't a community there. There are communities that are proximal if you a couple hundred kilometers away. So it's a matter of being a good community steward when you are operating from a logistical perspective, and you deal with groups like the Hunters and Trappers Association. They're concerned about caribou herds. They're concerned about migration of birds and other animals, herd animals. So we can collaborate with them in terms of and we have in the past, in terms of collecting information from them for them or on their behalf for the herds. We can bring elders from the communities to the site so they can see what we're doing. And we found that's very effective, because if they're in a community 500 kilometers away from the project and somebody makes a statement about what's going on in the project, they'll have to take it at face value. But if they've actually been there and seen it, and we've done that in years past when we were active, they have firsthand knowledge of that. So those are things that we do. It's different than in many places in Southern Canada. And really, it's its own unique environment where I think that the company has shown in the past that it knows what it's doing.
Right. Okay.
Or we try to.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. And then I guess last question here before we wrap up. Will you try to get the attention of or get into a uranium ETF? I guess this is largely probably assuming it's a CapEx driven as opposed to a desire. But what's your thoughts on that?
Well, if you're asking me if I'm going to drive for the highest market cap possible, absolutely. If that's what's necessary to be included. But, from my experience, it's not like it's a stockbroker where you can hound them for, weeks and weeks and weeks, and they'll take your call and buy your stock. It's like that's not how they play. So, they have their own sorting and vetting mechanisms and their own rules that they follow before they include you. And I don't think trying to get in helps. But, obviously, pushing for increased market cap or increased liquidity, if that helps, then yes, we will be trying to do that.
Great.
Do you think that answered the question, or do you think I'm not trying to avoid that question? I just don't know how I can try to get into an ETF. Dave, what do you think?
No, I think that's a great answer. I think it's, that's largely out of your hands, right? So, they've got different techniques, different mechanisms to take a look at projects and companies before they get into the uranium ETFs. So no,
yeah, I think like for the longest time, for the last few years, and it was funny, we weren't doing any work on the uranium project. And then I would look at lists of uranium companies and we wouldn't be on it. And I'd be all pissed off that we weren't on the list. And I was like, well, we're not doing any work. We're not promoting ourselves as a uranium company. It's no wonder we're not on this list. So, from the ETF perspective, it's maybe a new story, and they weren't around in 2011 and 12 when, we were pretty high profile, and we had and actually 1 year we had the largest exploration program on the globe. For uranium explorers. So we were actually really relevant. And, had there been several ETFs at that time, we probably would have been included.
Yeah. Well, look, let's put it this way. There were times earlier this year, people thought you were out of the uranium space and they said, why don't you divest yourself of the project, right? But I think, how much are you putting into it this year? What's your budget on the uranium project?
Well, all of those $11 million have to go to Angilak.
So
there could be more. There could be more, but at this time, all of those dollars will be going to Angilak.
And suddenly, that's one of the biggest projects in Canada. So
bingo, bango.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jim and Colin from ValOre Metals. Thank you, everybody else, for tuning in here. Reminder that Red Cloud Securities will be back tomorrow afternoon when Taylor sits down with Strategic Metals. So that's November 30th at 2 p.m. Eastern. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.